afternoon, and welcome to our May CCTST Grand Rounds. My name is Catherine Bowers, and I've been organizing Grand Rounds for a couple of years now. And today we are lucky to have Dr. Ketrell McWhorter speaking with us. She's an assistant professor and director of Global Health Graduate Certificate at the University of Kentucky in the Department of Epidemiology and Environmental Health. Dr. McWhorter actually completed her PhD in epidemiology here at the University of Cincinnati and did her thesis research at Children's. So she's familiar to some of us. And we're excited to have her speaking with us today after the great success that she's had post-grad. So following her time at UC, she completed a postdoc at NIEHS, doing some really interesting work with sleep and health disparities. And she's now at the University of Kentucky. And her research focuses on modifiable social and environmental exposures, such as overnutrition, sleep behaviors, air pollution, and cardiometabolic health. Also explores the impact on health disparities, particularly in vulnerable Appalachian communities. She's the current recipient of an NIH NCATS diversity supplement and a pending recipient of the University of Kentucky Center for Appalachian Research and Environmental Sciences Early Career Investigator Pilot Grant. So thank you so much for speaking with us today and to hear about some of your work in secondhand tobacco smoke. And it sounds like some additional co-exposures and sleep behaviors and cardiometabolic health. But I will let you take it away.
Yes. So happy Friday, everyone. And I'm so delighted to sort of almost make a full circle back to Children's. I did complete my work there while under the great Dr. Corey and Dr. Bowers. So it is really exciting to talk about some of the things that I've looked at social and environmental exposures, but today I'm going to focus on more the traditional environmental exposure. And one in particular is secondhand tobacco smoke. And we're still talking about smoke, tobacco smoke, which, we've got our work cut out for us as epidemiologists and public health professionals, because we're still talking about secondhand tobacco smoke and direct tobacco product use. So today I want to talk about the impact of exposures on sleep and, I'm just going to time myself here, and cardiometabolic health in a rural Appalachian pediatric cohort. And okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of a less traditional view and take a 20-second vignette for you to imagine that you're a kid again. And then so for some, that's super exciting. So I want you to stay in that mode of imagining that you're a child again. However, you have had a history of at least one breathing difficulty, for example, asthma or a cough or chest tightness or some sort of episode of bronchitis in the past 2 years. And you live in a household where there's at least 2 smokers who on average smoke about 20 cigarettes per day. So imagine that scenario. But unfortunately for this cohort, they didn't really have to imagine it. This is actually what the children in this population face. So nearly 40% of this cohort, as you'll see, had parent report of at least one recent breathing difficulty in the past 2 years, with 32% of the population living with at least 2 adults who smoked. And of those households, they smoked about 20 cigarettes per day. So what's the context of smoking in Appalachia? So smoking in the Appalachian region is about 20%, and that exceeds the US national average of about 16%. And the 16% average in the areas just outside of Appalachia. So this highlighted blue area is, if you're not familiar, is the Appalachian region, which crosses all the way from the top of the eastern part of the US all the way to the southern part of the US. So it's a pretty sizable region. As the great Hans Rosling said, who is a pioneer of global health, he's no longer with us, but he said some pretty sage things. And one of the things that he said is things can be bad, but they can be better than what they were. So although there's been a decline in the prevalence of smoking among US adults, falling from 21% to 14% in the past relatively recent 15 years, rates have declined faster in urban areas than they have in rural areas, such as Central Appalachia, as we just saw on that heat map. even after we control for psychosocial factors, demographic risk factors, and for smoking. And so it stands to reason that Appalachian youth are more often exposed to secondhand tobacco smoke and tobacco products since it's more pervasive in these areas. So why focus on sleep? What does it have to do with anything? Up to 50% of all children experience some type of sleep problem at some point during childhood. And disrupted sleep in childhood can lead to lifelong consequences that we can discuss far beyond the scope of this forum. But it can affect everything from academic performance, since we're particularly talking about children, to obesity outcomes throughout the life course. And we, just even through previous publications, we can see that this has a transgenerational effect. These can lead to long-term cardiometabolic health adversities. I in no way want you to work this out or read it at all, but just know that it's a list of counties, and the top 50 counties who reported at least a 45% age-adjusted prevalence of short sleep. And nearly 95% of those counties were in Appalachian states. So that's really the takeaway that I want you to have from this slide, is the fact that it's short sleep is very pervasive in these Appalachian states as well. So what about the kiddos? So the prevalence of short sleep among US kids aged 4 months to 14 is by state, as you can see here in the heat map. And I think we're all familiar with heat maps, meaning the darker regions are most likely the more prevalent regions. And so this is from 2018 to 2019, and it's according to the National Survey of Children's Health. And it's the most recent compiled data that I could, that is actually out there. Oh, that, okay.
It says human research and development is like stuff that you get.
Yeah. Oh dear. Maybe someone wants to put themselves on mute, maybe, I don't know. Okay. So the prevalence of short sleep among kiddos, we can see here in the Appalachian regions, is mostly dark orange. What about the adults? So the prevalence of age-adjusted prevalence of adults who reported short sleep varied as well in 2020, but we can see that there's a lot of dark orange in the area where Appalachia, roughly, the circle's not perfect, but roughly where Appalachia is located. So there are previous studies that have looked at this. We're not the first to look at it, this relationship between tobacco products and sleep. And so there have been some previous studies that have not just looked at tobacco and sleep, but different types of tobacco and different sleep outcomes that have been impacted by that. So there's previous researchers have looked at the association between active smoking, smokeless tobacco, secondhand smoke exposure, and insufficient sleep. There's also this onslaught of electronic cigarette use, e-cigs, as they're kind of colloquially referred to, and cigarette smoking associated with short sleep among US adults, young adults. And then also, there's been systematic reviews that have looked at and reported findings, significant findings and associations between secondhand tobacco smoke and sleep. It's important to sort of drive home the relationship between secondhand tobacco smoke and sleep and how it's related, even biologically. Nicotine and other components of tobacco smoke can actually disrupt the natural sleep architecture, leading to short sleep, poor sleep quality, excessive daytime sleepiness. If we look at a visual here of how secondhand tobacco smoke can lead to snoring, which is actually a symptom of obstructive sleep apnea, we can see that chronic secondhand tobacco smoke exposure can induce upper airway inflammation, and then that can lead to mucosal edema, or the swelling in the nose and the throat area, and then subsequently can either partially or completely reduce the airspace in the airway, which then results in snoring. And snoring it just makes the heart work harder. It's which in turn is why it's related to later life cardiometabolic health adversities, because we don't want your heart working harder while you sleep. As I said before, several previous studies have found relationships between secondhand tobacco smoke and sleep. However, the gap here is that few have included serum cotinine as an objective measure in these studies of nicotine exposure in pediatric populations. Also, this study is relevant in that the role of internal dose biomarker concentrations of metals, as we'll see with blood, lead, and blood manganese, remains largely unexplored in this secondhand tobacco smoke sleep relationship. And then finally, this study can lead to, perhaps lead to novel therapeutic approaches for sleep-related disorders, and particularly suggestions in clinical settings, and particularly with this vulnerable Appalachian population with very pervasive tobacco smoke still. So the first aim of this study was to examine the relationship between secondhand tobacco smoke exposure and parent-reported sleep behaviors in a cohort of 7 to 9-year-olds in the Marietta Community Actively Researching Exposure Study, or from here on out, I'll call it the CARES study, the CARES Appalachian cohort. And secondhand tobacco smoke was objectively measured by serum cotinine, which is a biomarker that measures that is an indicator of recent secondhand tobacco smoke. Sleep behaviors were measured by average sleep duration, and they were measured continuously and dichotomously, as we'll see in the method section, snoring frequency, and then frequency of night awakenings. With the hypothesis that secondhand tobacco smoke will be significantly negatively associated with average sleep duration and positively associated with the prevalence of frequent snoring and frequent night awakenings. I must make a note that these are parent report, just in case I don't have this on the method section, these are parent report of child sleep behaviors. So the CARES study design, this is the population of the CARES cohort that was used. They were participants from Marietta and Cambridge, Ohio, and surrounding areas, but mainly Marietta and Cambridge, Ohio. And the recruitment criteria was that moms needed to live in the community since they were 16 weeks pregnant. And the child needed to have been 7 to 9 years old. They recruited from 2008 to 2013 with environmental measures that include home dust and soil, stationary and personal PM 2.5, and other measures, other environmental measures. Some of the exposure biomarkers that were actually used in this study was blood manganese, as they lived near, I should say, as they lived near one of the largest ferromanganese plants in the area. So this was the impetus for this study, which was they were concerned about, all of the environmental exposures that they were being exposed to through this ferromanganese plant, which is why it's named the Communities Actively Researching Exposure Study. But there were other exposures: blood manganese, blood lead, there's hair measures, there's serum cotinine, there's deciduous teeth. So it's a very comprehensive data set. And then there were some other neurodevelopmental measures, as that was one of the objectives of the apparent study, which I'm not going to utilize here or discuss here today. So the data was collected from 404 children participating in the CARES study. There were objectively measured biomarkers in this study that included serum cotinine levels, blood lead, and blood manganese. The natural log of the biomarkers was used as a continuous variables throughout analysis. We took the natural log to do our best to normalize the distribution. And then all data on children, yeah, I did mention that, all data on children's sleep behaviors was parent or guardian reported. So we know that's one of, our limitations, but it's very common in these studies to have parent or guardian reported child sleep behaviors. And this is another visual of the CARES study design. And I just thought I would sort of give you an image so that you can know how, one, comprehensive the data is, and two, it's a longitudinal cohort. And 18 plus is actually highlighted for reasons that I'll highlight later in the talk. So we use generalized estimating equations to account for the correlation among household siblings. We estimated the beta coefficients in 95% confidence intervals of sleep duration among kids with secondhand tobacco exposure. We also used, for the dichotomous measures, the binary sleep outcomes, log binomial regression to estimate prevalence ratios in 95% confidence intervals of, actually, that should also say average sleep, less than 8 hours versus greater than 8 hours, frequent snoring, and night awakenings. Our model build is our model 1. It was regarded as adjusting for age, sex, and parent education. Then we further adjusted for history of breathing difficulty and BMI. And then in model 3, we further adjusted for how many parents are in the household. And models 4 and 5 just further and separately added whole blood lead in model 4, and then separately whole blood manganese in model 5, with the thought that these two are fundamentally different. There's no safe level of blood lead, while there is sort of a U-shape in terms of health, human health effect of concentrations of manganese. So here's the table 1. There's almost no other way to present table 1 except to present it. I tried to do creative ways to do table 1, but this is probably the most efficient. So I just want to draw your attention to some of the covariates that were used in adjusting in the models. So most of the kids had 2 parents living in the household. Most of the children's parents' education score, Barrett score, was on average 14.75, indicating some level of college education. We also see that over 30% of this cohort was overweight or obese. And that's compared to the national obesity prevalence of 17% in 2011 to 2014 during the time of the study. So that sort of gives you a comparison of 17% of the national average and over 30% in this cohort at the same, during that same time period. Almost 40% of the cohort reported at least some breathing difficulty in the past 2 years. And then there was 37%, nearly 37% lived in a household wherein there was at least a smoker in the household, 2 to 3 smokers in the household. And we can see that the daily cigarettes was 20, as we discussed in that vignette in the beginning. So what I did was I wanted to see the differences, if any, between the serum cotinine, the internal dose biomarkers of serum cotinine, blood lead, and blood manganese by sleep characteristic. And so what you see here are the 3 internal dose biomarkers, and the average, the geometric average of those by sleep duration, greater than 8 hours compared to less than 8 hours. And what we see here is there is a huge difference, a significant, as we'll say, difference between those kiddos, the concentrations of serum cotinine among kids who sleep less than 8 hours compared to children who get the appropriate amount of sleep. And we can see just even visually what a difference that is. So what about for snoring frequency? We also see differences between the average of serum cotinine levels between those who report frequent snoring or greater than or equal to 3 times per week compared to those kids that have less than 3 times per week. And then finally, for waking, we don't really see a significant difference here for serum cotinine levels between those that have frequent waking throughout the night or greater than or equal to 3 times per night. And these cutoffs are according to the National the National Sleep Foundation for recommended sleep behaviors. So we don't really see significant differences there. What about blood lead? Same exact pattern. So we look at the average blood lead levels between those with less than 8 hours compared to those with greater, and we do see a significant difference here. For snoring and blood lead, we don't really see much of a difference there, and the same is true for blood manganese and blood lead and waking. We don't really see a significant difference here either. Finally, the differences between blood manganese. What about the difference between blood manganese according to sleep behavior? We don't really see a lot going on with manganese, any significant differences here. So I won't spend a whole lot of time, but you can kind of see visually that they're pretty much the same. And if you've noticed that those that have the not recommended sleep characteristic, or in other words, they sleep less than 8 hours, or they have frequent night awakenings or frequent waking, their average for manganese, blood manganese concentrations is actually lower than those with the recommended sleep behavior. So it's interesting. So these are the regression coefficients from generalized estimating equations for average sleep measured continuously and natural log transformed serum cotinine levels. And so what we see, I've described the model build with model 1. I'll just remind you there, it's written as well, but age, child sex, and parent education. And then we kind of build on that model, and we further adjust for BMI, history of difficulty breathing, and so on. And we can see we have in model 3, when we fully adjust less the metals, blood lead and blood manganese, we have a 7, let me just highlight it here. There is, in fully adjusted models, not yet actually accounting for blood lead and blood manganese, for every unit increase in natural log serum cotinine, there was a 0.07 decrease in average sleeping hours, which translates to be about 4.36 minutes. So it can be more meaningful to you. About 4.5 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look at each unit increase, it can add up to a significant reduction in sleep, and especially over time. I'll orient you to these to this slide. These are the prevalence ratios and 95% confidence intervals of parent-reported average sleep duration. So now we're looking at it dichotomously. Previously, we looked at it continuously. Now we're saying, okay, less than 8 hours of sleep versus greater than or equal to 8 hours of sleep for children with serum cotinine levels. The dotted line at the 1 indicates no association. So if the bars, which are the confidence intervals, cross over that dotted line, then that indicates that we've lost our significance. If the bars are above, then it's significant. And so we can see here that in our fully adjusted model, or model 3, we see a 31% increased prevalence of short sleep, or kids sleeping less than 8 hours, with increasing levels of natural log serum cotinine. We see that significance maintained when we adjust for blood manganese as the far right, model 5, but we lose that significance when we adjust for blood lead in model 4. Similarly, this is the prevalence ratios and 95% confidence intervals of, now we're looking at parent report snoring frequency, greater than 3 times per week, which is regarded as frequent snoring, and night awakenings greater than 3 times per night for children with these biomarker serum concentrations of serum cotinine. The graph is the same dotted line 1. It indicates no significance. If it crosses over, we've lost it. And we see pretty consistently across the board, and 16%, no matter really what we adjust for, a 16% increased prevalence of frequent snoring among those kiddos with increasing levels of natural log serum cotinine. And that's in the black. So I tried to color code this, so I know it's a busy slide, but the black circle indicates the snoring estimates. The blue squares indicate night awakenings or frequent night awakenings. And what we see is that pretty consistently, they all cross over the 1. So we're not really seeing a significant increased prevalence of frequent night awakenings among those kiddos with increasing levels of serum cotinine, natural log serum cotinine. So the summary for serum cotinine, which is the indicator, the biomarker for secondhand tobacco smoke exposure and sleep behaviors, and fully adjusted models that separately include blood manganese and blood lead, is that there was a significant decrease, as we remember, saying an average sleep duration when it was measured continuously with increasing natural log serum cotinine concentrations after we adjusted for blood manganese. And that was about a 5-minute decrease, but we didn't really see that with blood lead. There was a 31% significantly increased prevalence of short sleep, or those kiddos sleeping less than 8 hours, among children with increasing natural log serum cotinine after we adjusted for blood manganese. And for frequent snoring, there was a 16%, if you remember, it was sort of 16% across the board. There was a 16% increased, significantly increased prevalence of frequent snoring among kiddos with increasing natural log serum cotinine across all models. And then finally, we really didn't see a significantly increased prevalence of frequent awakenings among children with increasing natural log serum cotinine. So I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Erin Haynes, who's the PI of this CARE study. Also, Dr. Christine Kim, who has helped with a lot of the analysis and some of the coding. Timothy Hilbert, he may or may not be on. He's right there in Cincinnati. Dr. Heidi Sukaru, who has always been a very full resource, a robust resource in terms of analysis. And Dr. Susan Ritline, who's at Harvard, who is one of my sleep study mentors. And then some other people for their significant contribution as well. Over to the right, some names you will recognize and some you may not. But before we get to questions, I did want to go back to the pending part is no longer pending. So I was awarded the UK CARES Early Stage Career Pilot funding. It is 9 months, so it is a very accelerated study, which I'm super excited about. The UK CARES, and I know you're hearing CARES a lot, but it's a popular acronym. But this is not the CARES cohort. This is actually the Center for Appalachian Research in Environmental Sciences, or UK CARES, and it's an NIEHS core center to enhance our research capacity, given that we're uniquely positioned in Kentucky to study lots of Appalachian populations and communities. And it focuses on environmentally induced disease initiation, progression, and outcomes and their community impacts. And so it's a very resourceful center. It offers, as you can see, pilot funding, career development, and different community engagement in terms of marrying academic research with community residents and translational research. So this study that I'm building on what you just what I just presented to you, they are now 18 years old and older. So to our knowledge, this is one of the first studies to collect longitudinal objective measures of secondhand tobacco smoke, which we just saw with the 7 to 9-year-olds, and we saw the serum cotinine and the levels in the cohort, the concentrations in the cohort during childhood. That's referred to as the CARES 1. CARES 2 is when they were 13 to 17 years old. So there is data where they recruited the participants again to collect different information. And so I'm going to actually use that information to characterize direct tobacco product use among these young adult adolescents, I would say adolescent. And then now they are 18 plus. So this is where the pilot study comes into play. So I've examined, as you just saw, all, their secondhand tobacco smoke exposure when they were 7 to 9. Now I get to actually look at their direct tobacco use and get objective measures of sleep. So I want to examine the relationship between tobacco product use and subjectively and objectively measured sleep patterns in this cohort. So the reason why I say tobacco product use and not just smoking is because there are so many different types of tobacco products, and we're finding that not just smoking, but different types of tobacco products impact sleep. So in the US, nearly 4% of adults are current smokeless tobacco users. And it's much higher in men than it is in women. And it's much higher in specific populations, namely American Indian, Alaska Natives, and whites have the highest use. And the two main types of smokeless tobacco are chewing tobacco and snuff. And so I've just kind of given just some examples there in case you have never seen it. There's all different types of more products than I've ever even imagined, tobacco products. So we really have our work cut out for us. So the first aim of this pilot study is to obtain subjective measures of tobacco product use, including, as you just saw, smokeless, heated, and electronic nicotine delivery systems, or e-cigarettes, via a one-time and daily self-administered questionnaire. So I'm going to ask them, in baseline questionnaire, but then also on a daily basis, they'll be asked 5 quick questions about what they smoked or what they used, generally what time they used them, and how frequently they use them, because all 3 of those dynamics have different impacts on sleep, depending on what time you use tobacco, how frequently you use them, and how much you use them, the quantity and the combination. So I want to get subjective measures, but then also I want to get a single objective measure of tobacco smoke exposure, again with serum cotinine concentrations at the conclusion of the study. The hypothesis is that the rates of subjective and objective measures of tobacco product use will be significantly higher in this Appalachian cohort compared to national rates. So I want to characterize, okay, what products are they using and what combination, and compare that to some national representative sample in Haynes or some appropriate national representative sample of adults, young adults. So the second aim is to obtain subjective measures of sleep. So in like kind of subjective measures of tobacco, again, I want subjective measures of sleep, but then also I want objective measures of sleep. So this is what I'm super excited about, to be able to get staging and architecture via a wearable, a passive wearable, and it's going to be the Fitbit Inspire 3, and it's a commercial wearable device, more and more frequently used in research studies, and it's going to, excuse me, I want to compare those to national rates of tobacco product use in a nationally representative sample. So this hypothesis is that the rates of subjective and objective measures of poor sleep is actually going to be significantly higher in this Appalachian cohort compared to nationally representative samples. And then finally, the third aim is going to be, if it comes up here, to compare subjective and objective measures of poor sleep between young adult tobacco product users versus non-users. So I'm hypothesizing that there's going to be a significantly higher prevalence of poor sleep measured both subjectively and objectively in those adults in the CARE study that are tobacco product users compared to non-users. And then there's going to be a dose response relationship, like I mentioned before, with frequency, timing, and combination of tobacco product use. This is a observational study. I plan to, I apologize here, there's some things going on with my slide. To recruit 40 participants, 20 self-reported tobacco users and 20 non-users. It's going to be 30 days, and participants are going to be mailed their Fitbit Inspire while they sleep at home for 1 month. And my intention is to get timing and duration of their sleep episodes. I'm going to discourage alcohol intake for the 30-day period, but they're not going to be restricted. And I'm not going to prohibit them from drinking caffeine. I'll just ask whether or not they had caffeine. Is going to be included in one of their as one question in the daily questionnaire. So they're going to get daily morning and evening questionnaires for 30 days. And the morning one is going to ask about the previous day's sleep, and the evening one is going to ask about that same day's tobacco product use. And then I'll get a blood draw at the conclusion of the study to measure serum cotinine concentrations. And then, participants will get to keep the Fitbit. That's their incentive. They will also get a monetary incentive for completing at least 21 daily questionnaires. That's considered an active participant, and as well as their blood draw at the conclusion of the study. And so now I welcome any questions. These are just the conclusions from this initial study that I thought I'd keep up just to remind you again of what the results were from the initial study. But yes, I welcome any questions that you have, any suggestions or any ideas. This is a collaborative effort, I think, in the research community. So quite exciting to do this in a cohort of children and now adults.
So I think we have a small enough group that if somebody has a question, you're welcome to come off mute and feel free to ask it.
Or comment.
If I could, Joe, can I just ask a question while we're
Yeah, sure.
So is this your pilot study is the offspring of the previous CARES study now that they're 18?
My pilot study is the same individuals of the original study. Mm-hmm.
You have all of their prior secondhand tobacco smoke exposure, but now you're looking at their own personal exposure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. And so with the CARES 2, so CARES 1 was 7 to 9 years old. CARES 2 is 13 to 17. And they're not calling it CARES 3, but it's just 18 plus. I guess the unfortunate thing is there is direct tobacco product use in the 13 to 17-year-olds. Yeah. So they're smoking. They're using tobacco products by this time, which isn't unfortunately unusual even when you compare nationally with e-cigarettes and I mean, obviously they target to younger children with having all these flavors, and just the commercialization of it is really incredible as they are targeting, indirectly targeting younger people. They're not allowed to directly target anymore, but they find creative ways to do it. So yes, this is the same exact individuals, which is why I think the study is going to be interesting, because it just kind of gives not the life course, but it gives a long stretch of time of their if they were exposed to secondhand tobacco smoke or moms during pregnancy. I do have some of that information. And then when they started smoking. So how this breeds more smokers. and we kind of know that. We kind of know if you're probably a higher likelihood of becoming a tobacco product user if you were raised in a household wherein you were around tobacco product use. But yeah, I think it's the same individuals. It's going to be an interesting study.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. And actually, you touched on another question I was going to hold off on, but I'll just ask since you touched on it, was about
Yeah.
the in utero smoking. It looked like you had close to 20% of the moms
Mhm.
smoked in pregnancy. And I wonder
Yes.
how much you guys have interrogated that data to look at the effects of in utero exposures versus later secondhand smoke or
Mhm. Yeah.
interactions. I bet there's a million questions. I'm just curious what's been done with that data and if you've seen anything interesting about, windows of exposure and in utero
Mhm.
effects.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I haven't looked at it yet. But we do have, smoking according to trimester. So there is a timing aspect of that as well. Um, Kentucky, about 30, a little north of 30% of pregnant women smoke in Kentucky, according to clinicians that I have spoken to. It's still a very pervasive problem among pregnant women here in Kentucky. So it is a very relevant question. So I will be including that in another paper. I got to get this one out first. But yes, yes, there's a question. Feel free to jump
Hi,
in.
Ketrell. Very,
Hi.
very, very interesting talk. Yeah, I wrote down several questions. So, when I was looking at the models and you had a model that was focused on, you had multiple models they were sort of hierarchical, so you were building them, correct? And then model
Mhm.
5 was like, so one question I had is, what was your sort of biologic reasoning for when you included blood lead that you no longer saw that impact on cotinine and sleep?
Say it one more time. What was
There
my
was a
bio?
model where you added blood lead levels in there, and then that
Uh-huh.
relationship between serum cotinine and sleep disappeared.
Yeah.
Model 3, I think, maybe. And I was curious as to what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I am not exactly, if I'm honest, I'm not exactly sure. Let me just go to it here. Why that is the case.
Model 4.
Yeah, if I'm honest, and I'm open to discussion on that, why blood lead, I would postulate that the relationship between secondhand tobacco smoke and sleep, some of the, when you lose significance, some of it is obviously explained by that factor that you included. But when manganese doesn't have an impact. And so I was just thinking like, okay, well, why would lead lose significance and not manganese, except that they're just fundamentally different metals and they have fundamentally different impact on human health. That's what I was saying with the U-shaped curve of the manganese, but there's no safe blood lead levels. So perhaps that relationship is more explained by a more harmful factor that is included versus manganese, which can be helpful at certain levels. So I am thinking out loud, to be honest.
No, you're good. You're totally good. I was just curious because if investigators are not thinking about manganese specifically, and they were interested in lead, then your interpretation of what's happening of this mechanism would be totally different. Like if we stopped at model 4, then your hypothesis linking serum cotinine to sleep may be slightly altered in your mind because the interpretation of the model says, well, maybe it's not serum cotinine, maybe
Mhm.
it's blood lead, which
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
think people, probably knowing a little more about the biological sort of linkages between blood lead levels and other, biologic changes in the body might be able to go, well, it's blood lead, or you can't tease them out because so many kids with higher blood lead levels also have higher cotinine levels or exposure to smoking. And so the stronger signal is lead, not smoking. I was
Mhm.
just curious. It was just one
Yeah,
of
yeah,
those
yeah.
things that popped up going, well, it kind of disappeared and then it popped back up again. And
That's
so
right.
I just didn't know.
Yeah, that's like I said, I was just chewing on that. I think about these
Yeah,
things
no, I think
while
it's
I'm
great.
driving. It's like, well, why
And
did it go away and come back?
in the first big study that you had, that you were talking about, the CARES pediatric cohort, uh, that was all based off of parent report of sleep?
It was, yeah,
So
that's one
there
of our
were,
limitations.
so did in the parent report, did they also have, and were there any questions though around, has your child ever had like a sleep study or diagnosed with,
No,
sleep problems, or take melatonin for sleep or anything like that?
no. And because I don't want to say sleep questions, unless it's a sleep study, sometimes sleep questions are ad hoc. And they're not necessarily, unless you're investigating a layered sleep question hypothesis, you'll get, does your child do this, but
Yeah.
it's yeah. So unfortunately, no. And it's not a knock, or I was over the moon that they had these questions.
Yeah, no, I
um
totally understand.
but yeah, and
In your
but they're
future, go
mhm.
ahead,
Go
sorry.
ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say in your future, this their cares too, you're actually giving them a wearable device to monitor sleep. Was that it?
In the CARES 2, they're 13 to 17 years
Mhm.
old. So that data is already collected and they brought them back for some neurological outcomes. But in the 18 plus,
Oh, okay.
the intention. And they didn't ask about sleep
Right.
in CARES 2.
I got it.
So the CARES 2 is my effort to just characterize their tobacco product use, because they do have quite a bit of questions even among the 13-year-olds. Do you smoke?
Right.
So I'm just sort of setting a scaffolding for
Mhm.
the 18 plus to say, yes, even they were exposed at 13, then they started smoke. I'm sorry, they were exposed 7 to 9. Their serum cotinine levels were this. At 13 to 17, they began smoking, and it's frequent. And then now at 18 plus, they've got poor sleep, and sort of trying to tell a story.
Right.
Um,
Mhm. Do
that
you also
prop
collect like other use? Like, are they doing cannabis,
hmm
which is
yes,
becoming way more prevalent?
yes, yes. So they have in the CARES 2, there is a drop down of, I don't know, probably 10 different products.
Right.
That's why I said, it's just,
Yeah.
water hookah and water and
Yeah,
pipes and
yeah.
cigarellos and all of these different terms, for all of these different things that there's, I don't know that there's any cells that have zero in them,
Right.
So yeah, there is. So I'm literally benchmarking, I'll say, well, not copying and pasting, but benchmarking and
Right.
just using that same exact question to say, hey, did you use any of these products today? If you did, when did you use them? And there's
Right.
some blocks of time. So that'll give me frequency. I'm sorry, that'll give me timing, combination. I do ask a question about frequency, because
Mhm.
that's a up and coming question in this paradigm of secondhand tobacco product use, is
Right.
if you do it within 2 hours of going to sleep, that has a more of an impact on your sleep than if you did 9 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm hoping I get people to answer the questions every day,
Yeah.
at least 21 days. I tried to make the questions really simple from validated surveys, 5 questions that they can just kind of get through really quickly.
Yeah.
Did you say how you were delivering those questionnaires to them? Are they doing it on the phone or something?
That is the discussion me and Tim Hilbert are having. Like, how are they gonna, am I going to text them a link to RedCap? What's the most effective? What will yield the best results? Because I don't want them to have to go to a website. I really want it to be user friendly, but I recognize that I may be with some limitations given what the questions I'm trying to answer. Maybe they can't do it in a text or something. So with me being kind of new at this, I'm leaning on, the CARES team that they've been doing this for a while. So it's still in conversation. Let me say that. There's Pat. Wow. There you are. It's good to see your face.
Sorry I was late. I'm just going to jump in real quick and we can talk more, but Tim knows how we're doing it with EMA and the when you went to bed last night, when you woke up this morning questions that we do. So that would be great to incorporate.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff.
And also that would be good to have, I want to make sure I'm on time here, good to have the same questions for future synergy. Synthesizing. I'm using the wrong S word. Yes, synthesizing of the data. Harmonizing. Oh man, I'm way off. That's what I mean to say. For future harmonizing is using the same questions, because that's kind of one of the things you kind of get dinged on. It's like, does this question actually mean that one? When you're trying to, I learned that during my doctoral work with harmonizing the data. But yeah, so that would be great. I'll mention that to Tim, because actually in my inbox is his edited version of my consent form. So I need to get back with him today, and I'll mention that to him today.
I had a quick question. Are you also collecting in your 18 and over, and you may have said this and I just missed it, sort of mental health questions?
I'm not if I were to do it, it would be in the baseline, but that is a actual.
It impacts sleep so greatly. It's tied directly to usage, to smoking. I think that, and it's going to be a chicken or egg question, because because sleep is, so impactful for so many things. But if you could capture, I mean, depression impacts your sleep. And you're more likely to use cannabis if you're depressed, and cannabis will make you a little more depressed, and not having sleep will make you more depressed. But I think it's really important to get some of those mental health questions.
Actually, I retract that statement, because I'm excluding those that have been clinically diagnosed with depression. I'm excluding those. Yeah.
I think that's great. That'll clean your sample, but I think you're going to have to ask, because being diagnosed clinically means you actually sought care. And a lot of people who self-medicate don't seek care.
That's true.
And so there's probably some very simple, basic screening questions that you could ask that allow you to understand that, because I would be so surprised if this population, and then if this is also the group from 3 to the younger crowd, it would be vastly interesting to know, well, how much of that younger crowd actually has a diagnosis now, and you're not following them because of your specific research question, but yet you have a whole slew of kiddos that, and there's a different kind of bias that might be introduced. You might want to think about how you capture information on everybody, and then for your sub-analyses, what you can control for your hypotheses. I don't know. I know we're messing you up with, like, you have a plan. We're like,
no. The plan is amenable. Like with the depression, I knew that so the exclusion is pregnancy, depression. If you've got some heart condition, or any other, your living condition doesn't allow you to sleep with contiguous hours or something of that nature. But it might be worth putting in a validated 2-question depression pre-screening. It's not a depression screening, but it is a screen, have you felt despair in the last 2 weeks, so that even if I'm excluding those that have clinically depressed, I'm still able to capture and take into account those that may not have sought, official clinical
Right.
diagnosis, but they may be exhibiting signs of depression.
Yeah.
And that might be valuable for me to know in my analysis. So
Yeah.
that is actually,
I mean, I think the people who have diagnosed clinical depression are a much smaller subset of the greater
yeah,
population who struggle with mental health issues, no matter what they are.
yes,
Plus, it's expensive to get mental health care, so
it is. Yeah, that's a very good suggestion to include in baseline questionnaire. Getting a star by all
and
these
honestly,
things.
if you have that information, it also kind of sets you up for kind of a future direction of research if you end up getting interested, because funding is interested in mental health.
Mhm.
And so you might set yourself up to be able to address different questions that would support the research that you're doing, but with the mental health focus.
Yes, that's very helpful. I'm in the process of IRB now, so there's still time to include that question in my questionnaire. I've drafted the questionnaires, but I think that is, I didn't include, it's just 2 more questions. So I think it would be beneficial for me to include some pre-screening mental health questions that, hey, this person, if they're not clinically diagnosed, they may be vulnerable or susceptible or probably down the line at risk. Let me say that, at risk for depression. So
Now, this is the problem when you actually present to epidemiologists, because then they're like,
I know.
have you asked my question yet?
Yeah, there's like 150 question baseline.
Exactly. Like I don't hear my interest in your
Exactly.
How about this one?
Have you
So-
asked about diet? Like the 24-hour questionnaire recall. Yeah. So I do ask about water intake. I do ask about one question about diet, and it's general. Do you find yourself able to eat healthy? It's a general question. So I am trying to, I don't want to be so high level that I'm not getting meaningful information, but I do want to be, I have a pilot. So I'm trying to get all of the questions that set me up for my K later in the year, that, all the information that would be valuable to branch off into the tentacles of another project. So I know I'm at time. What a delight. Oh my gosh, to see all of you. Yes.
Yeah, well, it sounds like an amazing opportunity. Congratulations on the grant, and thank you for sharing all of this with us. We're all very proud of you and happy for you. So